joining today's webinar, Meaning and Legacy, brought to you by the Institute for Women, Wellness, and Work at Ursuline College. My name is Brooke, and joining me today is Dr. Alique Topalian, who will discuss meaning and legacy. Alique is a two-time cancer survivor. She was first diagnosed with AML in 1998 at the age of 4 and relapsed again in March of 2021 at the age of 27. She is now in remission and using her voice to raise awareness about the unique needs of cancer patients. At age 7, she began to advocate for childhood cancers and raise awareness about bone marrow and cord blood donation. Her experience with childhood cancer inspired her to obtain her master's in public health and a PhD in health promotion and education. Today's webinar is about what gives your life meaning and what is the legacy you want to leave behind. Alique will go over key concepts regarding meaning, resilience, and legacy from the perspective of a two-time cancer survivor based on the teaching of Viktor Frankel's Man's Search for Meaning. Alique, I will hand things over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And are you guys all able to see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. Then I will start this show and you guys will all be able to play along. So depending on how this typically goes, it can be very interactive, so I can pose many questions, and if people would like to respond, kind of give some feedback about things that matter in their life, that would be great. Also, some of the things that we are talking about in here is based on meaning-centered psychotherapy. So this is a program that's been developed for the general population, but has now actually been developed into a small subsect for people affected by cancer. So I also think that while talking about some of these concepts, it can apply to any kind of chronic illness, any kind of illness, and also it can also be very supportive for family members, friends, concepts like that who are affected by cancer as well, as long as just everybody in their daily life. So a lot of this has basically been associated with distress coming from substantial diagnoses that happen in people's life. And those can have long-lasting psychological outcomes. So one of the things that is correlated with having better outcomes is actually resilience. So resilience is positively correlated with things like hope, which is one of the most powerful coping styles that people actually can have. It's also been found to help be associated with higher quality of life, better mental health, and in the space of cancer, it's also been shown to have help be correlated with better treatment outcomes. It may provide protection against negative effects of stress by lessening and absorbing some of that stress by helping to focus on more positive things that are happening in life. And it is also associated with a decrease in anxiety and depression and higher physical, emotional, and social functioning. However, lower levels of resilience are associated with higher levels of distress, depression, fatigue, and poor social adjustment overall. So, in your opinion, what is resilience? So it's actually defined as an individual's ability to maintain or restore psychological and physical functioning when confronted with things such as stressful life events and adversities. It refers to an individual's protective attributes and their personal characteristics that are thought to be modifiable and promote successful adaptation to different life stressors. So some of these things that go into building resilience are finding meaning and purpose in life, a sense of coherence, optimism, positive emotions, self-esteem, self-efficacy, cognitive flexibility, coping, social support, and spirituality. Resilience overall is a really dynamic mechanism, so it changes over time. There are parts of it that are biological, so your gene and environmental reactions, but there's also personal sides, such as that self-efficacy piece, coping, optimism, and hope. Things can also be affected by your environment and your social factors. All of these things contribute to somebody's resilience and having favorable psychological outcomes. And it's actually even associated in the cancer population with having more positive healthcare experiences and better provider relationships. So this can really be seen across the span of a lot of different dimensions. And recently, actually, promoting resilience has become a critical component in cancer care. And they're trying to identify more ways that can lead to different pathways of resilience. So a lot of times there's different studies that have shown that overcoming something such as cancer, a disease, or another adversity that happens in life can be an opportunity for personal growth. And if it is taken as an opportunity for personal growth, it can be associated with things such as enhanced mental and emotional well-being that can lead to better coping. So understanding what factors change, especially in patients who experience psychological growth from those who do not, can help us guide some of these interventions that we are trying to develop moving forward. And then different things that we've noticed in the general population. So past studies on things such as PTSD and other psychiatric comorbidities typically say that female gender, minority ethnicities having lower levels of education in younger age typically have worse outcomes when coming to being able to have these kinds of like psychological growth. However, in the actual cancer population, resilience is not associated with any of those typical socio-demographic factors. Sorry. So resilience and meaning. So when this is taken in the concept of a diagnosis, the first several months after someone's diagnosed, it's really a critical period. They're confronted with a number of physical, psychological, social, spiritual, and existential changes that come from disease. This period is really known for things such as existential distress, worries about health and safety, fears about dependency, and an individual's loss of autonomy. These typically confuse people with one's general sense of life, basically thinking that life has order and purpose, and it forces people to search for new meaning in life while they're trying to make sense of everything that's happening. So meaning can actually be viewed as an outcome of successful coping, which is an important element of resilience. So some of those personality factors, such as self-concept, self-esteem, optimism, positive emotions, and personal control, all really help with anybody trying to build resilience in their life. But different things such as personality factors, such as neuroticism, interpersonal dependency, those are typically linked with lower levels of resilience. But you can change this over time. You can help to build up your own resilience by developing different types of inner strength. So you can develop this through practices that help increase things such as gratitude and acceptance, and that can help you find your purpose as well. So how do you make meaning? So meaning making is basically a conceptual model that attempts to explain someone's adjustment to an experience. Some researchers say that meaning and meaning making is a behavioral process of adaptive adjustment. They also view it as a coping process. So it reflects an attempt to balance situational meaning. So meaning that's situational is meaning in the context of a specific event, such as a cancer diagnosis, such as something that happens as one of life's adversities that can be really hard to overcome. But then there's also global meaning. So global meaning comes from things such as an individual's belief and goals. And typically what they say is the best way to create the most meaning is by reevaluating and creating situational and global meaning together side by side. So theorists actually assume that attempts at meaning making result to better adjustments to these adversities and different diagnoses that can possibly happen across the lifespan, but only when meaning comes from that process. So meaning searching really can improve this in resilience by improving these internal and modifiable factors such as self-esteem, optimism, hope, and self-efficacy. But it's also been associated with basically building up different like your capacity to execute behaviors. So who knows what self-efficacy means? Also, I just realized there's a chat before, and I thank you for responding to that question. I didn't see it before, but now I've got it pulled up so I can read the chats as answers. Does anybody know what self-efficacy is? So there's a couple different ways that it can actually be defined. So self-efficacy typically refers to an individual's belief in their own capacity to execute behaviors. Yes, feeling that you can do something. So it's feeling that you can execute the behaviors that are necessary to produce specific things or performance. It reflects things such as confidence and the ability to exert control over your own motivation, behavior, and social environment. So that feeling that you are able to achieve something. And these meaning-making interventions are associated with an improved sense of meaning, purpose in life, and self-efficacy. However, sometimes meaning can lead to distress when you're searching for meaning. I said before, when you're able to reframe these adversities, when you're able to reframe a diagnosis, that all of these positive outcomes can come from it. However, it helps people be able to adapt to stress. But if you try to go through a meaning-making process and say you're not able to find meaning that you're searching for, it's actually been associated with higher levels of distress, poorer mental functioning, and less positive and more negative affect. So searching for meaning is technically only helpful when meaning's actually found. And if a meaning is not able to be found, it's more important for an individual to spend time and effort concentrating on things that are enjoyable, and experiences that make them happy, that they find joyous, and also focusing on a potential for future growth. So like I said before, actually was in the introduction, a lot of this framework for meaning-centered psychotherapy actually comes from Viktor Frankl. Has anyone read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning before? So Viktor Frankl is incredible, actually. This book basically details his life in the concentration camps during the Holocaust. Okay, so Kathy's read it before. And it's incredibly moving. It's incredibly moving to hear his story, to hear the story of what he observes from others around him, and to kind of grow through the ways that he is able to process this. The ways that he is able to reframe things and how he sees things changed based on the individual's frame of mind. And that's where a lot of these theories come from. So it addresses a lot of important existential issues. So he defines the will to meaning. So the will to meaning is the need to find meaning in human existence. He says it's a basic primary motivating force that helps to shape a lot of human behavior. Another main theory is that life has meaning. So the possibility to create or experience meaning exists all throughout our lives, even up to the last moments of life. If we feel life is meaningless, it's not necessarily because there is no meaning in our lives, but it's because we've become disconnected from our meaning. And then the freedom of will. So we all have the freedom to find meaning in our existence and to choose our attitude towards suffering and limitations. So when you hear these terms, these are some of the main terms that are kind of centered upon through his story and also through meaning-centered psychotherapy. So from suffering, it can either enhance meaning, maintain meaning, or cause one to feel a loss of meaning. So what exactly is meaning to you? Happiness, joy, and helping others. Yes. Understanding the true value of relationships. Very true. So meaning can technically be defined as having a sense that one's life has meaning, involves the conviction that one is fulfilling a unique role and purpose in life that is a gift. So it's that life comes with a responsibility to live life to one's full potential as a human being. In doing so, that makes us able to achieve a sense of peace, contentment, or even transcendence through connectedness in something greater than oneself. Meaningfulness refers to the moments when you feel most alive, connected and the most connected to existence. Things from the past, whether tragic or joyful, awesome or dreadful, when you think back on them, you can find life to be very affirming and profound overall. So then there's identity. So what is your identity? What do you identify yourself as? And people don't necessarily have one identity. This can be a lot of different concepts. I know I have many that I hold: friend, partner, daughter, researcher, and identities change over time, right? So your identity is your answer to the question of who am I? And your identity changes. So a lot of times in the cancer or chronic disease setting, we hear of people's identity changing before and after a diagnosis. But this can happen a lot with different stressful and adverse life events that people have to face as well. So our identity is influenced a great deal by the people, the roles, and other aspects of our life that give our lives meaning. Identity and meaning are very closely related because identity is composed of what gives your life meaning. And then there's legacy. So legacy comes into all of the things that we are discussing. The typical thing that people think when they hear legacy is what you want to be left behind. So legacy, we'll talk about it a little bit more in some of the concepts that are coming up, but it's not just what you want left behind. It's also the life that you live. So does anyone, I know we kind of talked about happiness and joy and understanding value in relationships, but does anyone feel comfortable sharing any kind of experience that's been a source of pride and meaning for you, or something you wish you could accomplish, but maybe haven't done just yet? Yeah, being a patient caregiver. That's a good one. And so something that also happens in this meaning-centered psychotherapy kind of initiative is typically having people finish with something called a legacy project. So this is something that you do as part of this, but it's also something that if you wanted to, you can move on from this presentation today and do yourself. So it's a project that you can undertake that integrates some ideas of things such as meaning, identity, creativity, responsibility, to generate a sense of meaning in your and light in your life, and facing adversities. So for me, when I went through this actual initiative, one of my things that I decided I wanted to be my legacy project was actually this presentation, spreading these concepts and helping other people find meaning, because I found it really helpful to me. I actually did meaning-centered psychotherapy and learned about this initiative right when I got released from the hospital from cancer treatment. So I had been in the inpatient for about 6 months, and I'm not sure if many of you know, but typically one of the times of greatest distress throughout an individual's time with cancer is actually when that active treatment starts and people are kind of dying down. They are not going to doctor's appointments all the time. Their life isn't necessarily being ruled by that diagnosis anymore, because for so long, that's your main focus. So when all of it stops, when you're better and you're just trying to be in recovery mode, that's actually been when a lot of patients are the most distressed. And that was something that I noticed when I was released from the hospital. I was so used to having people around 24/7 that going back to being alone, I hadn't been alone in so long. And it was hard to basically go back and process everything that had happened in that time while you're in fight or flight mode. And you don't really have time to think about what's happening to you. So I actually started this when that finished. And I was really moved by this intervention. And it's something where I've been giving this talk to different populations of survivors. Primarily, I've given it at a couple different conferences. And every time I give it in those populations, all people tell me is that I need to open it up to more people, that not just people affected by cancer could benefit from this. So that's part of why I was really excited to be able to share this all with you all today, and now bring you all into my legacy project as well. So Viktor Frankl identifies 4 sources of meaning. And this is how we're able to create meaning. So people create meaning through their choice of attitudes, even in dire or life-threatening situations. They can create meaning in their ability to connect with life through art, humor, nature, love, and relationships, which is some of the things that we talked about when we were talking about your sources of meaning. They're able to find meaning in their engagement with life through work, hobbies, and other activities, and their understanding of their own past, present, and future legacy. So historical sources of meaning. So this is looking at life as a living legacy. So it's the legacy that you've been given. So that is the past. Then think about when you look back at your life, when you look back at your upbringing and your family history, what are the most significant memories, relationships, traditions, values that have made the greatest impact on who you are today? That is your legacy that's been given. And then there's the one that is the legacy that one lives. So that is your present. That is what you are doing every single day. That is what you're going to be leaving behind. If you are a professor or a researcher, it is the class that you teach, the impact that you have on your students, the research paper that you submit, even if it doesn't get accepted yet. And if you're not going about your life holding the door open for the person behind you, the way that you're able to affect the world around you is the legacy that you live. And then there's the legacy that one will give. So that's your future. That's you don't necessarily even know what that legacy is going to be yet, but we always have an opportunity to create it. So when you reflect upon who you are today, it's what are the most meaningful activities, roles, or accomplishments that you are the most proud of? As you look towards the future, what are some of the life lessons you've learned along the way and values that you may feel are important to you that you would want to pass along to others? What is the legacy that you hope to live and give to others? And this is what you can do every day. So many times people think that leaving a legacy has to be something big. oh, I have to do this great thing that I'll be remembered for all time. But that's not necessarily what a legacy is. It can be that, yes, but your legacy is created by all the small things as well. And imagining how you want to be remembered by your loved ones, and even the people just that you interact with every day. So those are some different ways to think about legacy and kind of reframe it, where it doesn't need to be so big. It's just the things that happen in everyday life, the things that your family has passed on to you, you know, carrying down family legacies and traditions that are carried on from your family to your children, to their children's children, and going on for generations. And then there's attitudinal sources of meaning. So this one was one of Viktor Frankel's favorite, actually, as well. It's one of my favorite, but it's also one of the hardest sources of meaning, I think, when you actually put it into context. So attitudinal sources of meaning are figuring out how to turn personal tragedy into triumph through the attitude taken towards the given circumstances that you're facing. So the attitude taken towards physical suffering, personal adversity, or one's own mortality. Attitudinal sources help us not just face, but also deal with life limitations. So this is one of the highlights of Viktor Frankel's core theoretical beliefs, that by choosing our attitude towards suffering and circumstances that are beyond our control, such as cancer, death, or other adversities, we may find meaning in life in a way to transcend these limitations. Suffering is such a complex term, though. Carl Jaspers defined suffering as the human experience of encountering any limitation. In life, we encounter many limitations, from the mundane to the profound, and suffering can be from any of them. Eric Castle defined suffering as a loss of personhood. So this is best understood as the loss of one's human essence, or more simply put, the loss of the significant elements of your own identity, an identity formed by the roles you play that give your life meaning. So when Frankel speaks about suffering, he is in fact speaking about the limitations imposed by events in life, and the impact of these limitations on your identity and your sense of humanity. Frankel suggested that one of our greatest freedoms as humans is the freedom to choose our attitude that we take towards suffering. When all else has been stripped away from someone, your physical, your mental, your spiritual well-being, you still have the capacity to choose how you can respond to that given circumstance. And then there's the term transcend that Frankel keeps bringing in. And that's also a very complex term, but it means to overcome or to rise above these limitations or obstacles in life. To transcend also involves the concept of connectedness beyond oneself, to rise above one's own individual concerns and connect to something greater than themselves. It can involve connectedness to loved ones, or to values, to different causes, or to life itself, the things that you care most about in the world. So one thing that Frankel said was that the fact that we only have a limited amount of time also challenges us to make the most out of the time that we do have. So he uses a metaphor of a sculptor. He's hammering away at an unshaped stone. He knows that he has a limited amount of time to finish his work, but he doesn't know when exactly the deadline will be. So it forces him to use his time as best as he can and to make the most out of every moment. For Frankel, the stone at which the hammer, stone at which we hammer is our lives itself. And what we hammer out is our values: creative, experiential, love, family, beauty, art, and attitudinal. So how we cope with our unchangeable fates. We can't judge a biography by the number of pages in it, but by the richness of its contents, just as we cannot judge our lives simply by their length, but the richness of its contents. And these contents include how we live, but also how we die, how we view life and death, how we cope with impending limits such as death and the meaning that we find in it. So life gives us many things. Some appear to be wonderful, and some appear to be tragic. What is most important is to utilize our freedom to choose how we respond to what life gives us. And I think that that's one of my favorite quotes from Frankel. So when you're thinking about attitudinal sources of meaning and how you can find those in your life, think about what are some of the life's limitations, losses, or obstacles that you faced in the past, and how did you cope or deal with them at the time? If you are facing a diagnosis, if this is something physical, since your diagnosis, what are specific limitations or losses you faced, and how are you coping or dealing with them now? When you're facing these limitations, losses, and obstacles, are you still able to find meaning in your daily life despite your awareness of the limitations and finiteness of life? Another one that he poses for people to think about is, what would you consider a good or meaningful death? How can you imagine being remembered by your loved ones? What are some of your personal characteristics, your shared memories, or meaningful life events that have made a lasting impression on them? And what do you want to do now that will make you happy or satisfied when you die later? And I always just thought that this part was so profound in his thinking. And one of the stories that he tells in his book is actually about how he would see different men alongside him in the concentration camp. And he always tried to focus on what his life would be after. He would focus on this book that he was writing. And he would focus on finding his wife again, finding his family. He would focus on what life would be after the concentration camp. But he saw that there was many men who one day this attitudinal source of meaning would go away. And they wouldn't be able to think of it the same way anymore. The things that they were looking forward to, the things that they were holding on to, they weren't able to hold on to it anymore. So sometimes it was if someone found out that their spouse was killed in a neighboring camp, or if something happened. I know Victor really struggled when one of the guards found him his manuscript that he had been working very hard to write, and destroyed it. And I know that was something that gave him, it was a major crisis for him during the time, because it was one of the main things that was giving him meaning. And how once people lost that, he actually was noticing that people would be dying and passing away sooner once they felt that they lost their meaning. And then there's experiential sources of meaning. So this is some of the things that you guys were talking about even before, when you were talking about finding joy and happiness. So any attempt to restore a person's inner strength has to first succeed in showing them some future goal. So there's the quote of those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. And I think that that really reflects on some of the stories that I was just telling you that Victor wrote about in his book. But studies find that the expression of positive emotions and laughter can help to actually reduce distress following a stressful life event and facilitate adjustments to different things and obstacles that one faces. So this is, how do you feel you connect with life and feel most alive through experiencing life? So this can come from a variety of things such as love, beauty, humor, relationships, different experiences that you have. So to find your experiential sources of meaning, what you really need to think about is, what is your why? What is your why for everything that you do? And then there's creative sources of meaning. So these are different things that are a lot of them kind of some of the things you would probably think about most basically when you're thinking about meaning. So finding meaning through your roles and your work. What are your accomplishments? What are your commitments? How do you show courage? And what responsibilities do you have, and to who? It's all focusing on this creativity that you bring, this courage that you have, and your responsibilities in life. So living life and being creative requires courage and commitment. Are you able to think of times in your life where you've been courageous, taken ownership of your life, or made a meaningful commitment to something of value to you? Do you feel you've expressed what is most meaningful to you through your life's work and creative activities, such as your job, parenting, hobbies, or causes? What are your responsibilities? Who are your responsibilities to and for? And do you have any unfinished business? What tasks have you always wanted to do, but you have yet to undertake? What's holding you back from responding to this call? So that is the end of the informational part of this program. So there are a project happening at university hospitals about, it's called the Realms program. That's for individuals affected by cancer. Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center actually came out with this meaning-centered psychotherapy. They're the only place where you're able to get certified in it. There's a very long wait list. So that is something that, you know, if anybody is interested in spreading the word on. And this is my contact info, but we will come back to that because I want to take you all back to the 4 sources of meaning to kind of do some of our more interactive side of this presentation and open it up to different questions. So out of these 4 sources of meaning, is there one that you feel stands out to you the most or resonates with you the most?
I think for me, it's attitudinal, because that's really, maybe the most under your control. You can choose to have a positive attitude, although sometimes it isn't fully not fully under your control, but, taking a positive attitude toward your circumstances and kind of changing them into something positive if you can, for me, that's the biggest thing.
Exactly. Brooke, you said the same thing. Do you have anything to elaborate on with that?
I think it really is just, sometimes it is just the little things that we do that can make a big difference. And, I agree. I think, so oftentimes I think we think of, what is our big grand gesture that people will be remembering us for. But, when I think back to my family who is no longer with us, it is sometimes those little moments that are the things that are the most that I cherish. And that's what I would hope that when people look back at me, it is just those little things that I did that maybe didn't mean anything to me in that moment. But it was a big impact for somebody else.
Yeah, I always think of I'm not going to be lying on my deathbed thinking I was able to publish in a tier 1 journal instead of a tier 2. And, that's that kind of thing, or I got this award or that award. It's mostly the relationships and the little things that are meaningful.
So before I was diagnosed, the kind of timeline of how this all happened, I went to undergrad. I started in 2011, finished in 2015. I knew I wanted to go to graduate school. Originally, I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I didn't get into PhD programs the first time. I went for my master's, graduated with my master's in 2016, knew I wanted to go for my PhD, switched over to health promotion I graduated in 2020 into the pandemic. And being on this academic track and I had always been my goal to be a professor, and being an early career academic is a kind of crazy place to be. And all I was focusing on was, the trying to find the positions, trying to find the grants, trying to get the publications, trying to, and that's all I was focusing on. I was working 4 jobs at the time too, working on a couple studies, and then I was working for Hamilton County Public Health, trying to do source control for the pandemic, because I have my master's in public health and wanted to make sure to be involved in the greatest public health crisis of our time in a meaningful way. I was working 80-hour weeks, and those were the things that mattered, that you were talking about. What journal am I getting published in, and how, this is all that I can focus on. And then in March of 21, I got sick, and being out of commission like that. So going from working 80-hour weeks, 1,000,000 miles a minute, to having a very hard stop and having to actually do all of my treatment inpatient. And I actually went back to Cleveland for my treatment, even though I live in Cincinnati. And through that is when I realized that that wasn't the legacy that I needed to be focused on. That these things, the things that you pass on through your family values, the attitude that you take toward, these adversities, and being able to experience and create things out of life are really what's most important, and what really has the most impact on you. And that was definitely a really interesting learning process for me. What about anybody else? Anybody else have any input on what kinds of sources of meaning stand out the most to you? Kindness. Yeah. Kindness is a big one. From yourself and from others. Having people having people think of you and thinking of kindness, but also the kindness that you're given from people around you, I think is really important.
I sometimes think about experiential, I remember when my father passed away. I mean, that was a really difficult time, but it was just something that just happened, and all of a sudden everything came to a screeching halt, and it was just like, we had to focus on that. And that was, in the end, I mean, it was an opportunity for my family to get back together and really support one another, and think about all the good times that we had with him and everything. And it gave life a lot more meaning than maybe we would have had if we had just been going blissfully along with everything going hunky-dory and no problems. It was that experience that kind of made us stop and say, like, what really matters.
Exactly. And that's one of the things, that's kind of talked about theoretically, is that a lot of times some of the most meaning making times happens during these times of adversity, because it kind of puts a halt on your everyday life, things that you typically expect, how things typically go, and kind of uproot things and make you reevaluate what's important and where your values are. Anyone else have anything?
I think the pandemic put a lot of this into perspective for people.
Yeah.
A lot of people, loss of life, people that were in great health one minute, gone the next. I think for me at least, I think it shows that tomorrow is not guaranteed.
Exactly.
And, I think the more that we can enjoy the moment and, kind of the stop and smell the roses type of thing, I think we just have to realize that, life is precious.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I think Susan mentioned, grace, and that's an important thing too. Like,
Yeah.
it's like that strength that you get to help you to get through the difficult times. And it's something that kind of comes from, I believe it comes from God, and
Yeah.
it's something that is, that is more available maybe in those times of struggle than, because then other times when you don't really need it, or everything's going great, and you're just sort of like, oh, everything's fine, I can do this all myself. I can, I don't need anybody else. So.
Yeah, I agree. So does anyone have any questions about anything that we discussed today, or thoughts about any of the questions that I brought up and posed, along with ways to consider these different sources of meaning? I know I kind of give a lot of different prompts, of things to think about that you can pull these different sources of meaning from. Does anybody have any questions about any of those, or want any of those repeated, or brought even to a conversation to think about again?
Alique, how do people go about doing this if they want to, either themselves or they want to maybe, talk to a family member about, what is their legacy project, so to speak, going to be? How do they start that dialogue?
So a lot of it comes from like the actual meaning centered psychotherapy initiative. But that's something where you can kind of, pose some of the questions that I talked about today. Kind of talk about what these sources are, and then some of the questions that we discussed. Those are really how to get your brain thinking about them. And those are actually the questions that are asked in the psychotherapy initiative itself. So you start there, you kind of go through there, figure out the different sources of meaning. And something that I really love to do when I do this presentation sometimes is actually like vision boarding. So giving people magazines or stickers, whatever you really have available, going over these different sources of meaning in these questions, and then kind of opening it up for people to vision board what they feel and what they see as their sources of meaning after it, and seeing what they really identify with. And then kind of from that vision board, taking the ability to figure out what can be put into context. So some people, it's been doing a different kind of art project. One person was making like a recording, like they were doing different songs, and doing that as a legacy project. So it's really whatever resonates with that individual, basically by going through these questions, reflecting on them, and thinking about what really their own identity is.
If you can send me the presentation, I'll be sure to send it out to the group.
Yeah.
That way, if anybody wants to start thinking about their legacy project and doing this on their own, you'll be able to have this as a starting point to start the discussion.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions from the group? Well, Alique, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with the group today. We will get the information out to everyone. And I also want to remind everyone that if you like today's session, we have Alique back on Thursday, November 3rd. So next week, and she is going to be talking about the basics of nutrition. So she's putting on her other hat to be able to give us some nutrition tips along the way. So I hope that you'll be able to join us for that. And when I send out the presentation and the recording for today's webinar, I will make sure to send the link for those that might want to register for next week's event as well. Otherwise, we will give you a few minutes back in your day, and we appreciate you all joining us, and look forward to seeing you again at a future webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.